Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. This evening I want to talk about meditation on the body, mindfulness directed towards the body, kayanusati, and the various approaches to that are given in the Satipatthana Sutta. The Satipatthana Sutta occurs in two places with some minor variation. One is in the Digha Nikaya and the other is in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's considered the main text for meditation instruction in the canon. In some traditions, Vipassana, they call Satipatthana meditation. And Satipatthana means base of mindfulness or established place of mindfulness. And the sutta gives four bases for mindfulness, four aspects of being in which it is fruitful to direct mindfulness, that is body, feelings, mind, and mental contents. The largest section is devoted to the body, with the most variation of approaches. The structure of the sutta is quite terse and concise, and this has led to many different interpretations of the details and some controversies, beginning with the commentary fleshing out the meaning of the phrases in the text. My own theory about the Satipatthana Sutta is that because it's so terse and compact, I think what we have, the text that we have, is in the nature of somebody's lecture notes. I suspect that what actually happened was the Buddha gave a series of talks on meditation, perhaps as part of an organized retreat, and that what we have are basically the short summaries. It's certain that the text as we have it is by itself not really sufficient as a textbook of meditation or as a detailed instructions of meditation, but rather terse guidelines or summaries of practices. So that said, by way of introduction, let's turn to the actual text on the contemplation of the body. There are 6 separate practices listed in the Satipatthana Sutta. The first related to the body. The first is mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati, which also occurs in some more detail in its own sutta, the Anapanasati Sutta. The text has, "And how, monks, does a monk abide contemplating the body as body? Here a monk, having gone into the forest, or to the root of a tree, or to an empty place, sits down cross-legged, holding his body erect, having established mindfulness before him. Mindfully he breathes in, mindfully he breathes out. Breathing in a long breath, he knows he breathes in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, he knows he breathes out a long breath. Breathing in a short breath, he knows he breathes in a short breath. Breathing out a short breath, he knows he breathes out a short breath. He knows that he breathes out a short breath. He trains himself thinking, I will breathe in, conscious of the whole body. He trains himself thinking, I will breathe out, conscious of the whole body. He trains himself thus I will breathe in, calming the whole bodily process. He trains himself thus, I will breathe out, calming the whole bodily process. Just as a skilled turner or his assistant in making a long turn knows he is making a long turn, or making a short turn knows he is making a short turn, so too a monk in breathing in a long breath, etc. So there's a number of points in that description that have been interpreted in different ways, beginning with establishing mindfulness before him. The Pali is adimukha, which literally means before his face. And it's been interpreted in different ways, but I think the most common way is that it's a reference to the point of mindfulness being in the front of the face at the nose tip. It's also been interpreted metaphorically as he puts mindfulness to the forefront. And knowing the length of the breath in and out, this has also been subject to some different interpretations. Some hold that one should control the breath and deliberately breathe long or short. And this is not, I would say, not been the main line of the tradition. It seems like it's turning anapanasati into pranayama, breath work, which is an entirely separate practice, that one should just be aware of the nature of the breath. And the general traditional way of teaching anapanasati is that one does not control the breath, one just observes it. This is actually a point of difficulty for some meditators. Some meditators have difficulty observing the breath without controlling it. My experience is people that are uncomfortable with not being in control, which you might call like A-type personalities, people who want to be in charge of every little detail and uncomfortable with just trusting the process. But particularly for those people, I think it's quite important to separate the control of the breath from the observation of the breath. It can teach you a lot about the not self-teaching ultimately, but just the letting go into a position of trust, just observing and separating the intention from consciousness as two separate things. Also, breathing in and out, conscious of the whole body. That's also been interpreted in different ways, and there are different valid ways of doing anapanasati. There's not just one way of doing it. Some teachers prefer a method of being aware of the whole body breathing, feeling the breath going right into the body and out of the body. Others take this, and this is actually the commentarial position, take it to mean that one is aware of the whole body of the breath from beginning to end, beginning of the in-breath to the end of the out-breath. And I think that approach is definitely more fruitful for jhana work, because you want a simple, uncomplicated object to be aware of to develop the stability and unity of mind. Then as a second part to mindfulness of breathing, the first part is generally taken, this first paragraph is generally taken to refer to developing breath as samatha practice, developing it samadhi towards jhana, and the second place is insight or vipassana, the second paragraph. He abides contemplating the body as body internally, contemplating body as body externally, contemplating body as body both internally and externally. He abides contemplating arising phenomena in the body. He abides contemplating vanishing phenomena in the body. He abides contemplating both arising and vanishing phenomena in the body. Or else mindfulness that there is body is present in him just to the extent necessary for knowledge and awareness. And he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world, And that, monks, is how a monk abides, contemplating body as body. And that particular paragraph with the appropriate changes is repeated after each separate meditation. This is how this text in general is taken as an insight meditation text. And I think the key point here is he contemplates body as body. And so when we get into meditation on feelings, for example, it says he contemplates feelings as feelings. And this is part of the very important aspect of developing insight or vipassana, this clear seeing, is to be able to discriminate between the processes so we don't mix up the bodily process with feelings or with thoughts or with anything else. See the breath just as the breath. And if there arises because of the breath, as it can with the samatha, there can arise pleasant feeling or a kind of peacefulness, to notice that separately. That's under the heading of feeling. But just to notice the bodily process as bodily process. And here it is, mindfulness of breathing, it's the sense of touch that is being focused on. And to keep the different processes distinct, not to muddle them up. So the first meditation of the body is mindfulness of the breath. Then the second is the four postures. A monk when walking knows he is walking, when standing knows he is standing, when sitting knows he is sitting, when lying down knows he is lying down. In whatever way his body is disposed, he knows that that is how it is. So the four classic postures are sitting, standing, lying, and walking. And it's possible to do meditation in any of the postures. Most commonly sitting and walking, but standing is also a posture that can be used. Lying down is actually the most difficult posture to meditate in because of the danger of falling asleep. One has to be very alert and awake to seriously meditate lying down. Although you can use it when you intend to sleep. You can meditate into the sleep states. And I spoke about that in a recent talk. But to do a extended meditation lying down is actually very difficult. The general point here is to be aware of the postures of the body, and this goes beyond simply the four postures, and to be aware of the disposition of the limbs, which is definitely an important part of insight directed towards the body. And it's particularly important to be aware of change of postures. When you go from walking to sitting or from sitting to walking, to be extra careful with your mindfulness, paying attention to every movement of the body. The Burmese master Mahasi Sayadaw, in one of his writings, he uses the story of Ananda to make this point about the importance of being aware of change of posture. Ananda was the Buddha's attendant, and when they held the first council after the Buddha's decease, there were to be 500 arahants agree on the canon to fix it so before it became confused. And Ananda was critical to be there because he was the only one who had heard all of the Buddhist teachings for the latter half of his career. And a problem arose because Ananda was not yet an arahant. He was a stream winner. So there were still 4 months to go. They were going to hold the council at the end of the rainy season. So they told Ananda, go into retreat during the rainy season and work real hard and become an arahant so you can get into the council. And Ananda worked really hard, very diligently with his meditation. And the very last night before the council was to open, he had determined he would continue walking meditation all night and make a final last effort. But he became totally exhausted, and he kind of gave up and decided to lie down. But he sat on the edge of his bed and lied down, changed into the lying posture, very mindfully, continuing to meditate on every motion of the body. And it said that between the sitting posture and his head hitting the pillow, he attained the 3 stages of awakening. Bang, 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 and became an arhat. And part of that is that he had only at that point, by having a sort of given up, he had, but without abandoning the practice, but with giving up the goal-oriented, grasping nature of, striving for arhatship and just purely practicing, then he was actually paradoxically only then really practicing pure right effort, and he was able to attain arhatship. But he did that during the course of changing posture. And if you're doing a meditation retreat and you're sitting and walking alternately, it's a very critical moment, is changing postures, and never to do that mindlessly. So I recommend generally, if you're doing a sequence of sitting and walking, to start with the walking and make sure that if you have any little busy things to do, like go to the toilet or drink a glass of water, do that at the beginning of the walking period and get it out of the way, so that then the transition from walking to sitting can be absolutely seamless. It's not broken, and you can sit down mindfully. So that's the 4 postures. And then the next one is clear awareness, or sampajanya. And this is being mindful in all activities. The text is, again, a monk, when going forward or back, is clearly aware of what he is doing. In looking forward or back, he is clearly aware of what he is doing. In bending and stretching, he is clearly aware of what he is doing. In carrying his inner and outer robes in his bowl, he is clearly aware of what he is doing. In eating, drinking, chewing, and savoring, he is clearly aware of what he is doing. In passing excrement or urine, he is clearly aware of what he is doing. In walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, and waking up, in speaking or staying silent, he is clearly aware of what he is doing. So this is a practice of sampajanya, which is often paired with sati. Sati and sampajanya. Sati is what we generally translate as mindfulness. And in this context, when paired with sampajanya, sati refers to the more intense, immediate, momentary awareness of dhammas. And sampajanya is a broader awareness that takes in context. So that the full picture of what one is doing is held in mind. And an important part is not being divided in one's mind. But, when walking, just walk. When eating, just eat, and so on. For example, one practice that can be very useful when attempting to meditate while eating, which is very useful to try and do, because eating is something we can get really lost in the sensuality of. If you're trying to practice mindfulness while eating, a good simple practice is to only eat 1 spoonful at a time. What I mean by that is, you take a spoonful and put it in your mouth and finish it completely and swallow it before you put the spoon or the fork into the bowl and start digging around for the next delicious morsel. It's actually surprisingly difficult to do. If you just try and do that without anything else, just try and eat 1 spoonful at a time, and notice how many times you slip up with that. The mind jumping ahead of the present moment and not savoring the food that's in the mouth at the moment, but jumping ahead to the next one. And we have to remember, too, in the exact details of what's being said here, that this text was being delivered to bhikkhus. And we have different texts the Buddha delivered to different audiences, sometimes to lay people. This particular one was delivered to bhikkhus, so he mentions wearing the robe and carrying the robe. And that's actually something that does require some degree of mindfulness to be able to wear these robes. Now, we don't know exactly how the robes were worn or carried in the Buddha's time. We're not sure of that. But certainly the way we do it in Thailand, it's often a kind of comical sight to see the newly ordained monk trying to keep his robes up. They're always falling off, slipping off his shoulders and sliding down, and his lower robe coming loose. It does take a certain degree of awareness to be able to wear the robes. They're not just throw them on and forget them. And as for the difference between Sati and Sampajanya, there's a well-known story of Ajahn Chah that there was a visiting monk senior to Ajahn Chah came to Wat Pah Pong, and of course he sits at the head of the line being the senior monk, and everyone was really impressed with this monk because he seemed to have impeccable bearing and behavior. And when they went on alms round, he was in front and Ajahn Chah was second behind him. And this monk had his robes perfectly arranged and carrying his bowl correctly, and he was putting one foot in front of the other completely mindfully until they came to a corner. They're supposed to go around the corner. He kept walking straight forward right into a pile of buffalo dung. And Ajahn Chah gives that as an example of the difference between Sati and Sampajanya, placing the footstep one in front of the other with complete mindfulness, but then not paying attention to the bigger picture that the street turned a corner, and he ended up walking under a shed into a pile of buffalo dung. So Sampajanya is being aware of the context and suitability, the skill in means, and staying within appropriate context. Then there is the reflection on the repulsive parts of the body, the 32 parts of the body. And a monk reviews this very body from the soles of the feet upward and from the scalp downwards, enclosed by skin and full of many-fold impurities. In this body there are head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, mesentery, bowels, stomach, excrement, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, tallow, saliva, snot, synovic fluid, urine, just as if they were a bag open at both ends and full of various kinds of grains, such as hill rice, paddy, green gram, kidney beans, sesame, husk rice, and a man with good eyesight were to open the bag and examine them, saying, "This is hill rice, this is paddy," etc. So too a monk reviews this body. In this body there are head hairs, etc. This is actually only a list of 31 parts. The commentary has 32 parts. It adds brain. This list omits brain. And the names of some of the internal parts have been variously translated, and there's some uncertainty as to some of these things, like mesentery and pleura. Oh, what exactly does that, because of the Pali, is maybe a bit obscure. But what we have as a general principle is a way of looking at the body in a three-dimensional way to change the perception of the body, or to open the possibility of a different perception. And this meditation has some benefit in overcoming sexual lust, although one that's coming up, the charnel ground contemplation, is more powerful for that. This also has a very good effect of breaking up attachment to the body and seeing the emptiness and not self nature of the body because of the compound nature of the body. It's said of the three characteristics, emptiness is disguised or missed because of the illusion of compactness, which means that we tend to see things as compact units, clearly defined objects. Like we look at a person and we see a body, and like that's a human body, that's a man's body, that's a woman's body. But that's an illusion from the ultimate sense of seeing it as composed of parts and pieces, which themselves are composed of individual dhammas. And this is a step towards that by seeing, mentally perceiving the body as it actually is in 3 dimensions, as composed of multiple organs and various liquids. And this is the nature of the body. When one sees a body with desire, that comes from focusing on the signs and particulars. This is a phrase from the Visuddhimagga. When we look at a desirable body with lust, it's because we're focusing on certain aspects only. We're not focusing on earwax or contents of the stomach or it's like just certain bits that we pay attention to. And this is deliberately paying attention to different bits. Only a few of them are actually visible to the eye. These first 5 that are the ones that are visible to the eye, hair of the head, hair of the body, which are 2 different words in Pali as well as in Pai, and nails, teeth, and skin. These are the visible parts. Those are given as part of the ordination of a novice, a samanera, as part of the ceremony. Is the ordaining monk will give this to the novice. This is your first meditation. Work on these 5 objects to help them overcome sensuality. Now, when you separate any of those parts, like those parts can seem desirable. We can, be desirous of someone's beautiful skin or hair, but when you separate it as an abstract entity, it's not so desirable. I once worked for an afternoon and volunteered for some fundraiser. We were barbecuing teriyaki chicken, and a few of us spent a few hours, maybe like a couple hours, skinning all these chicken parts. We had like a huge heap of chicken parts, and we put out a kids' wading pool, those rubber pools, and filled them with chicken bits, and we're pulling the skins off and throwing them into a bucket. And it's just so disgusting. Just a pile of skin, separate from anything else. It's gross, this slimy kind of membrane. I can relate another experience. When I was a young monk at Wat Pah Nanachat, pretty newly ordained, and most of the monks, it's a training monastery, so most of the monks there haven't been ordained very long. We had a visit one day from the Ubon Girls' School. It was all these Thai girls between the ages of about 15 to 18 or 19 in their little skirts and school uniforms. And they're sitting in rows in front of us. It was very disturbing to the meditative, contemplative mind, I would say. And I started doing in my head an exercise of, okay, there's like 40 pretty young Thai girls here. So there's a big pile of skin over there. There's a big pile of hair over there. We'll put the guts over there. Buckets of blood and pus. Yeah. And that's actually that's kind of a bit of a variant, but that's kind of one of the practices that is mentioned in Visuddhimagga as a way of using 32 parts, is to do it on the body of someone else that you're feeling sexual desire towards, to then examine the body in terms of the 32 parts to overcome that desire. As a kind of footnote to mention why brain is not included here, it seems like the ancient Indians had no idea what the brain was for. It does become added in the commentaries in the Visuddhimagga. But then in the Visuddhimagga, there's a very long section on the 32 parts of the bodies that goes into each one and gives a kind of a medical description of how it's shaped, what its color is, and what its function is. And when it comes to brain, it says brain is a kind of marrow found in the skull of the head. And when a person gets sick, it liquefies and drips out of their nose. So they had no idea what the brain was or what it did. So that's the 32 parts of the body, or 31 actually in the original text. Well, maybe before I move on, I should explain briefly the formal way of doing the meditation is to go through the 32 parts. You don't have to memorize them to start with. If you do this meditation a bit, you'll end up memorizing them. They go in a sort of logical order. And I don't particularly like the translations given in this Morris Welsh's version. They're a bit odd, like pleura. Like who knows what a pleura is? But there are better translations. And you go through the list in the forward order and the reverse order, and spend a moment or two visualizing each part. And don't hurry it, don't rush it. Go through and spend a little time with each one. And after you've gone through it in the forward and reverse order, then pick one that seemed easy to visualize and spend a considerable amount of time just visualizing that one part. It might be bones or blood or whatever it might be. That's a traditional way of doing this meditation. Then the next one, number 5 of 6, is the 4 elements. A monk reviews this body, however it may be placed or disposed, in terms of the elements. There are in this body the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the air element. Just as a skilled butcher or his assistant, having slaughtered a cow, were to sit at the crossroads with the carcass divided into portions, so too a monk reviews this very body in terms of the elements. This is the air element, etc. So this is actually parallel to the previous meditation. It's just another way of dividing up the body, seeing it in terms of the elements. And the elements being in the Buddhist Abhidhamma, not the literal air, earth, fire, water. Those are more like mnemonic labels. The elements are qualities or aspects of matter. And when they're applied to the body, the fire element is the energy of the body. The air element is not only the breath, but the movement of the limbs. The ancient Indian physiology seemed to have what I would call a pneumatic theory of motion, of physical motion in the body. That, like when the legs or arms move, it's a wind pumping into those muscles and causing them to move. And in a metaphorical sense, that's actually, if you take the air element as motion, which is what it really means, that fits. And the water element is not only the liquid of the body, which the body is mostly liquid. Every cell is a little bag of seawater, in essence. It's not just referring to liquid as such, but shape or form. Because liquid, like you pour water into a vase or a glass, it takes the shape of the vessel. So form is a product of the water element. And the earth element is the solidity or the impenetrability, the hardness of the body. And focusing on those aspects. And I have in the past taught here before, so I think this will be familiar to you, the meditation given in the commentary to this passage that talks about using the 4 elements in walking meditation. That lifting the foot from the ground is fire element, then moving it through the air forward is air element, settling it to the ground is water element, then pressing it to the earth is earth element. And that's actually a very good meditation to do while walking, because particularly if you're the type of person who's troubled by wandering mind and you're always daydreaming and thinking, because this sort of takes the thinking process and harnesses it to the meditation, that you have to keep track of where you are in the walking. Then the last one given is the charnel ground contemplation. Again, a monk, as if he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, 1, 2, or 3 days dead, bloated, discolored, festering, compares this body with that, thinking, this body, meaning my own body, is of the same nature. It will become like that. It is not exempt from that. So he abides contemplating the body as body, etc. And then it goes on to the different stages of decay. A monk, as it were, see a corpse in the charnel ground thrown aside, eaten by crows, hawks, or vultures, by dogs, jackals, or various other creatures. The monk sees the corpse in the charnel ground thrown aside, a skeleton with flesh and blood, connected by sinews, a fleshless skeleton smeared with blood, connected by sinews, a skeleton detached from the flesh and blood, connected by sinews, randomly connected bones, scattered in all directions, a hand bone here, a foot bone there, a shin bone there, a thigh bone there, etc. Again, a monk, as if he were to see a corpse in a charnel ground thrown aside, the bones whitened, looking like shells, the bones piled up a year old, the bones rotted away to a powder. So this particular sequence of stages of decay, beginning with a bloated, discolored corpse, and then it's attacked by dogs and jackals and birds, and then it's a skeleton, and in various stages of the skeleton, with sinews, without sinews, then scattered, then the bones bleached white, and then turned to dust and blown away. This is actually, if you do this visualization, it's starting from a very strongly, repulsive image, and then actually a violent image with the animals attacking it. It's gradually more peaceful and sublime until it goes to nothingness. I don't think I've ever done it here. Maybe one day we should do it. I've done a guided meditation based on this in a couple of different venues where, I start out by saying that, you're in a charnel ground, a place where they just lay out bodies and leave them. They don't bury them. It's an ancient Indian practice. And you're in a charnel ground and you see the people coming from the village carrying a corpse wrapped in a white cloth, and they're chanting and waving incense, and they lay it down on a bier, and then they walk away. And then you go over and lift the corner of the cloth, and it's your face. And I did that once, and there's a woman in the crowd just gasped. Ah! And then you go through the various stages of decay, and it does move the mind towards a place of peacefulness, from kind of the horror of death into a place of peace and release. The bones whitened and then turn to dust, and then they're blown away, and there's nothing. So this can be done purely imaginatively, but it's also traditionally done, it was done often in the Buddhist time, to meditate on an actual corpse, to have an actual dead body. And because charnel grounds were all over the place in India, it was hard to find. In Thailand, it's still practiced to some degree, when someone dies in Thailand, they usually cremate the body. But if the person dies suddenly or particularly by violence, which happens a fair bit, then the belief is that the person dies so suddenly they'll be confused and their ghost will not know he's dead and will wander around his former places of habitation. And if the body is burned, then he has no evidence that he's dead. But if his body is either buried or given to a monastery for use as a contemplation, the existence of the body for some time, the ghost will be attracted to it, and then seeing his own body will realize he's dead and will be able to move on, take a better rebirth. So sometimes they donate a body to a monastery. If the abbot of the monastery has made it known that he's looking for one, when one comes available, it'll be given to him. And I visited one such place, Wat Kuan, where the abbot was doing this, had this practice going for some time. And they would set up a body in the forest in a wooden coffin. And the monks would sign up like a roster. You get your turn. One night you go out and spend the night contemplating the corpse. And they had a dais or a seat arranged above the coffin. And you take the lid off the coffin. It's just a light plywood coffin, flimsy thing. You take the lid off and put candles around to light it. And you sit like, 2 or 3 feet above on a dais and just contemplate the dead body. And it's quite powerful. I did not expect it to be so moving of an experience. I remember the fellow had a termite trail across his face. Insects were boring into his head, and there was a little ridge of raised flesh that was, this tunnel made by the termites into his head. So that's probably the most powerful meditation for both acquainting oneself with the reality of the impermanence of the body and for overcoming desire for the body. There's a story from the Buddhist time that there was a famous courtesan, Nampabali, who was sought after by all the young men, and the kings were actually competing to get her to set up her establishment in their capital as a tourist attraction because she was so popular. She was renowned for her beauty and her charms and all this. And when she died, the Buddha told the king, don't bury her for a few days, don't cremate her for a few days, just leave the body and then let me take care of it. And so that's what they did. And then when the body started to get rotten and repulsive looking and smelling, he had it loaded into an open cart and dragged through the town. And there was a man in front ringing a bell saying, who wants this body for 100 kahapanas? That's apparently what she charged for a night of her services, 100 kahapanas. Of course, there's no takers. And he says, who wants it for 50, for 20? It goes down to like a penny, a farthing. No one wants this body. And so then, they dragged it off and burned it. So these various ways of contemplating the body, which obviously was given some importance by the Buddha. It's given the first section of the Satipatthana Sutta and the longest. It has these 6 separate ways of contemplating the body: the breath, the postures, clear comprehension of activity, meditation in motion, like doing any kind of chore or activity, the 4 elements, the 32 parts, and the corpse meditation. So all various ways of directing mindfulness towards the body, and they're all a little bit different in their effects, and they all have various ways of doing them. There's not just one fixed way of doing any of these meditations. So I hope that is of some benefit, and I will leave it there.
Nandamaya Dhammakataya Sadhukaram Dadamase.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.